Cool. Hello to, I can see my last conversation on there. Hello to Zach, who last week said that he talks about climate change when he's playing video games on Twitch, which is cool. Yeah, last week I had Rebecca Huntley on, who was talking about not just her book, but Climate Compass and a lot of the takeaways about communicating. So that was cool.
Yeah, I'm a big fan of Rebecca Huntley. She's a fantastic writer.
Yeah, it's great to have someone like that in the Australian context, being able to look at attitudes and social trends and all those things in impactful conversations. Because I find even in the science communication space, and potentially especially, like, people try to jam what they know from science communication broadly into this specific thing. And but it requires like some in-depth, like topic specific analysis, and it goes beyond science for sure. So yeah, it's good to have more of those conversations.
Yeah, absolutely.
All right, sorry, we're just setting up the other live streams now.
Cool.
Oh, hi, Ruhama. We've got Ruhama, who's in Bangladesh, just saying hello. Hi. Yes, do say hello if you're on the live stream watching. Let us know where you are. And also start thinking about questions, because we will be talking about the relationship between Australia and energy, fossil fuel and renewables, and politics, and how we got here and where we're going, hopefully, and where we're going, hopefully not as well, I suppose. Okay. All right. Well, we're about to go to starting soon screen, and then I'll see you on the other side.
Great.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to Climate Australia. I'm your host, Lee Constable, and I'd like to start, as we always do, by acknowledging the country, the land on which I am broadcasting to you wherever you are. I'm here on the land of the Turrbal people, the Ningi people here in Queensland, Australia, or what is known as Queensland, Australia today. And I'd like to acknowledge traditional owners, past and present, not just here on Turrbal Country, but also I'd like to acknowledge, given that this is an international live stream, the First Nations people of the land on which you are watching this. And in doing so, I want to acknowledge what our topic is today. Our topic that we're talking about with our guest, Ketan Joshi, will be energy. And it will be talking about sustainability and Australia's history with that politically. But we do have to acknowledge that that history is a post-colonial history, and also that these issues are issues of colonisation. So I'd like to introduce my guest today, Ketan Joshi, who is speaking to us from Norway. He is a climate and clean tech analyst and writer. He focuses on energy and politics and often writes in Renew Economy, as well as many other publications you can see on his website as well. And he's recently written a book, Windfall: Unlocking a Fossil-Free Future, which is about Australia's energy and climate opportunities and disasters. Welcome.
Hi, it's really good to be here. How are you going, Lee?
I'm good. Thanks so much for waking up early and coming on the show to talk to us, because you aren't in Australia, but you do talk about Australian energy always still.
That's right. Yeah, I moved actually. So, of course, I've spent most of my career in Australia. I moved to Oslo about a year ago, and I'm going to be here for another 2 or 3 years. My partner is actually working at the University of Oslo, so I am just continuing my climate writing, but with a new kind of focus on Europe and the US in addition to Australia. So I guess at some point I'll just expand to try and soak up the entire world.
Yeah, whole world domination.
But of course, it all kind of centers around Australia a lot, because, that is just a country that I can't stop reading about and looking into, because a lot is going on, as I'm sure we'll get into.
Yeah, and so you've obviously, having grown up and done your education here, and you've been surrounded by, initially, I guess it was more of the tech and engineering side of the energy problems and solutions. How did you get into being where you are now, which is more on the writing and just mixing those things with politics and, really talking about that side of Australia's energy relationship?
Yeah, so, my background is a scientific background. So I did a science degree at Sydney University. I was really into neuroscience and psychology, two things really fascinated me a lot. It's not an uncommon story. I think a lot of people are drawn to psychology in particular when they're sort of starting out at university. But when I finished my degree, I didn't really know what to do with myself. And so I sort of just went out looking for sciencey jobs. And, I just remember going to all these job interviews and not being particularly compelled by what I was hearing. And then I went to this job interview for a data analysis with a renewable energy company. And I was like, I really don't know a lot about renewable energy. I know about data analysis. And I went into this interview pretty badly uninformed about renewables, and thankfully, they sort of took a punt on me. And what I learned almost immediately, from day one, is that obviously my job was technological. I was doing data analysis and monitoring and creating systems to bid and dispatch wind farms in Australia's energy markets. So I could call on my analytical background pretty easily to figure that out. But it was very political. I started in February 2010, right at the peak of the Rudd Gillard government, and wind farms in particular were a very symbolic and heavily political thing. Just the image of them. So, I would walk into work to do my Excel spreadsheets and my macros and coding and things like that, and my SQL databases. But you would always walk past a newspaper and the front page would be something to do with climate action, very often something to do with renewable energy or wind farms. A lot of it was incorrect. A lot of it was, accurate, but describing an inaccurate fight, a political fight that wasn't particularly grounded in reality. And so I realized very quickly that what I really wanted to be doing was participating in these fights, but calling on my scientific and analytical background and saying, there's actually a better way we can have these discussions. There's a better way of thinking about these problems than kind of just having this like, you know, two incorrect people, but with differing on like differing sides. I kind of thought, you know, that's not a great way to do it. So that's basically what kind of, during my tenure at that company, I started off in analytics and ended up in communications and community engagement around wind farms.
I find it so interesting because it is a different but common story, that like starting in science, and not necessarily like the science of climate or energy, but like a lot of us, myself included, start there, then end up realizing that what we thought it wasn't necessarily what it was, and then we go into science communication, and then we realize things are broader than just science, and it's all about politics too. And it's it's important to have people that are able to be a credible voice in that media and politics space. For those who are watching who aren't in Australia, what would you kind of say, as in a nutshell, it's got to be a big nutshell, but in a nutshell, you know, what kind of has been our recent couple of decades? What's the process been like politically when it comes to politicizing the energy debate or discussion?
Yeah, it's surprisingly easy to summarize. So basically what has happened is Australia's politicians are somewhat beholden to the fossil fuel industry. Obviously, there are big companies in Australia that do two things. They dig coal out of the ground or they burn it. They dig fossil fuels out of the ground or they burn fossil fuels. So this includes coal and gas. And those people who do that make money out of doing it, and they want to continue that. And so once climate change was realized was essentially discovered as a problem, as a threat to human safety, suddenly it became very clear to these companies that they need to figure out how to keep going. They were under very serious threat. This is in the early 2000s. And what happened is they pitched their ideas to the government at the time, the Howard government, and they said, so that's the Liberal National Party, the Conservative Party in Australia. And they said, look, our principles that we want to keep doing what we're doing. We're a business, and it aligns with your principles as a political party because you say that businesses should continue unregulated, mostly to kind of do what they want to do. And of course, there was ideological alignment. Obviously, a lot of large fossil fuel companies also donate a lot of money to big political parties in Australia. And so that's part of it too. And then on top of all of that, there is actually a really constant flow of people between lobby groups, companies, and political parties. So you sort of trace the history of names, and often people who have worked in a fossil fuel lobby group will have also served as in a political position as a staffer or something like that, or they'll have worked in a company. So those three threads of connection mean that both of Australia's political parties, to very different degrees, have struggled with the climate change problem. And the consequence of that is that Australia's emissions, very simply, they rose a lot from sort of early 2000s to 2010. In 2010, there was a big political change where the Labor Party, the sort of centre-left party, was elected on a climate platform. And they said, look, we're actually going to take action on this. And amazingly enough, they did. You know, you can really see this big dent in emissions from 2010 to about 2013, where they enacted regulation of carbon. They call it a carbon pricing mechanism. They implemented a target for renewable energy that is just winding up today. And they did a whole bunch of other things that had all these impacts. And then after that, it just returned back to what it was before 2010, which is essentially there are some leftover things that are still happening from that era of high action. That is putting downward pressure on emissions. But of course, the government itself is in favor of those industries that increase emissions. And the consequence is that Australia's emissions are kind of flatlined from about 2018 to 2020. COVID-19, of course, will cause a dip, but that's not a policy, you know, that's happening everywhere. As well.
And it's the fact that you mentioned COVID-19, I mean, even in our country's response to that and forming a committee to actually decide what our economic response and our entire response, not just economic, will be. There's actually names in there that you can track back to the fossil fuel industry as well, right?
Yeah, absolutely. It's a very old story. It's so peculiar. Like you look back at the sort of early 2000s, and what was happening is there were these groups being formed. One was called, for instance, the Low Emissions Technology Advisory Group, and it was the fossil fuel industry. That's who was in this advisory group, and they were there saying, look, we shouldn't be deploying renewables. We really don't want that because that's actually going to cut into our business. What we really want is for you to be investing money in future research, like so technologies that are sort of 10 to 20 years down the line, because that is something that it has no direct impact on the burning of fossil fuels today, and B, it actually, if it does actually turn out to work, then it's something that they could then profit from in 10 to 20 years. So that is precisely what Australia's climate policy has become at the moment. Australia signed up to the Paris Climate Agreement, which was this agreement in 2015 from a whole bunch of countries around the world that said, we want to try and limit temperature change to well below 2 degrees Celsius. And that means essentially the world reaching net zero by 2050 to 2060-ish. And of course, there's a lot of variation depending on which country you are. And now Australia signed up to that, but its targets are on the absolute lowest possible end of that spectrum I just described, which is a 28% reduction by the year 2030, based on 1990 levels, I think it was. That's not an ambitious target, but Australia is currently on track to miss the least possible ambition that it could have.
On track to miss it.
Yes, and so those are the government's own projections, and it's the reasons are what I just described, which is basically activities that result in high emissions, the government is in favour of, and activities that reduce emissions, the government is either neutral about or actively against. And so those are the consequences. I mean, they're the government, and the policies that they choose and enact and the policies that they choose to ignore has a consequence in the real world in the number of greenhouse gas molecules that Australia is releasing into the atmosphere. And so that is where Australia is at. And it's really, of course, the biggest problem, as you just mentioned, is that Australia is looking to pull itself out of the COVID-19 economic hole, specifically with gas. So that's both the extraction of gas and a whole bunch of associated infrastructure, so like new gas pipelines, expanding the burning of fossil gas, so like building a new gas-fired power station. The government is very keen on that. There was an announcement a month and a bit ago. All of these things, of course,
money in that, actually, isn't it?
Exactly, yeah. And so I think something people don't quite realize, I certainly didn't realize this before I started looking into it, is that the act of taking gas from the ground is itself an extremely emissions intensive activity, right? So this is something that I won't get too much into the technological details, but essentially taking gas from the ground causes methane leaks. Methane is a greenhouse gas that is many more times potent than carbon dioxide. And so the consequences are very, very significant even for small leaks at these sites. Some satellite data was just released a couple of days ago, in fact, that is starting to track these things, not based on what the companies report, but of course based on the all-seeing and totally objective eye of a satellite in space. And it's just watching us as humans releasing quite shocking amounts of methane from the act of digging gas from the ground. This is before you even burn it. And so processing it, of course, requires the burning of quite a lot of gas as well.
Yeah.
In fact, the majority, I think the second highest growth factor for gas in Australia is burning gas to get more gas, which is, you can see how that, it's that's actually quite significant to me, right? Like that's so first of all, it highlights the extreme inefficiencies in getting our fuel from a secondhand source, which is essentially dead organisms under the ground that absorb sunlight a long time ago. It's like we can absorb sunlight now. There's fresh sunlight, it's not like there's a shortage. So we can really skip the whole dead organisms in the ground. And if we decide to source our power from things in the ground, then there are just massive, massive inefficiencies that are related with that. So what we're going to see if those plans come to fruition is that what I just described as the balance between all the things that are reducing emissions. So in Australia, that is almost solely new renewable energy on the grid. Mm-hmm. That was incentivized by that little pocket of good climate policy that I mentioned, from sort of 2009 to 2013. That's still having flow-on effects. And that's going to keep going, but it's probably going to be offset entirely and then some by increases in the extraction of gas. And so when you look at the breakdown of why Australia's emissions are flatlining, it's because there's two lines. One line is going up, and that's the emissions from extracting gas, and then the other line is going down, and that's emissions saved by installing renewable energy.
Right.
And so that's why the line's in the middle, right?
Yeah.
But it's a tug of war between the two things. And Australia's renewable energy growth has this natural rate because it's replacing stuff that shuts down, right? Like all of the existing infrastructure, all of the coal and gas-fired power stations, they get old and they shut down. But what we know for absolute certain is that we need to build renewables faster than that. And so on top of all that stuff that I just described, I know it's a bit exhausting, Australia also has to face the prospect of accelerating its renewables build out, not by having a new target. So not by saying, let's subsidize this particular technology, because that's sort of past now. Like the technology has just got so cheap that you don't need to subsidize them. You need to make room for them.
But they're actively working against the progress made by renewables without their help, since that pocket of good policy. They're actively pushing against that whilst actively pushing for things that undo the good work.
And the other
feels.
the other really good example of what you've just described there is transport. So this is an area where there has been no change, and there's forecasted to be no change, which is basically Australia, like many other countries in the world, has a fleet of several million combustion engine, fossil fueled machines that transport people from one spot to another spot. These machines have a shelf life. They'll get old eventually. Now, if you look at the future of Australia's cars and you go, let's assume that every single one that gets old is replaced by a decarbonized version. So currently the best technology for that would be an electric vehicle. If you look at the decay rate, so when cars get old and you go, what happens? Is that enough? Like, can we just wait for cars to get old and then, assume that everybody will buy an electric vehicle if it's cheap enough? And again, it's not enough. You actually need to accelerate that transition far beyond the rate at which stuff just gets old. And that's and I'm talking about Australia here, but this is a really common thing between many, many different countries. I live in Norway, and Norway is accelerating its transport transition, right? So, you go outside and you just see electric vehicles all over the place. I mean, I live in Oslo as well. That's where the highest concentration is. And they have used a bunch of different policy mechanisms. So electric vehicles get, they don't pay tolls on the toll roads around the rings around the city. You get free parking. I think there's some municipalities have free charging for certain times, I think it is. And you also don't pay tax. on the car when you buy it.
So
That's
many
a huge,
incentives.
huge, it's massive, right? So of course, tax, you pay a lot of tax here in Norway. And the consequence is that Norway's fleet of vehicles is starting to change, right? Like, it's not, the metric that we care about is not how many new cars are electric. And the most recent number, I think it was a month ago, I think it's like 53%, 54% of all new car sales are electric cars here. But the stock, the machines that are on the, in driveways and on the roads, and that, either release greenhouse gases when you run them or don't, that is still not changing fast enough.
Yeah.
Now that is a real, what that then says is that, actually we need to start thinking outside of just electric vehicles. We actually need to start thinking about how to get people away from driving where they can. So things like walking where you can, cycling where you can, public transport. And Oslo is thinking really hard about this because there are all these really cool new initiatives. Just today, I signed up to this new climate scheme. What they're trying to do is get everybody to keep cycling in winter. I have never cycled before. Yeah. I've only just started cycling properly, in the past few months. I've had some scary moments in the rain and the wet, and I was pretty worried about when it gets icy and snowy. And then I saw this today, and then they're like, we'll explain to you how to safely ride on ice and on snow. We'll give you a subsidy on new winter tires. So it's a 50% discount on new winter tires. And also a subsidy on like a service, like checkup on your bicycle.
Oh, great.
And so there was never really a threat of me driving instead of, walking or getting public transport. So maybe I'm not the best example, but I imagine that's going to have a big difference to at least some people who have a car and they're like, oh man, winter's coming. I need to drive,
Well, they may cycle in the winter only now and then, but this increases the number of times they do or something like that.
Yeah. And so, also it's dark here in winter. So they're handing out free lights.
Oh, great.
To click onto your bicycle. So, I think a lot of things like that, there's going to be this huge array of different things you need to do to get transport changing. And Australia is doing pretty much zero of those things.
Pretty much zero.
It's like the easy stuff caused the most political tension last year. In 2019, there was a federal election in Australia. And the Labor Party was proposing an emission standard for vehicles. So, it's a relatively straightforward thing. There's one here in Europe, and it's the number of grams of CO2 per kilometer that a vehicle emits. And you just have an average, and you say, we want all the new cars sold in this particular time period to emit below a certain number. And the number just keeps getting lower every year. And you start to introduce penalties for auto manufacturers who don't abide by that limit. Europe is not doing particularly well on that, by the way, thanks to the four-wheel drive / SUV. That design of vehicle is basically destroying Europe's emission standards for vehicles. I'm not going to get into that, but that was basically the model that was proposed for Australia. And, it became this huge political thing where the opposition party was criticized because they wanted to destroy the weekend, and you can't do anything with your electric car.
I found that so interesting though, because I feel like incidentally they tried to make it a political issue, but it accidentally kind of promoted to the public the benefits of EVs, because then everyone was debating about how good they are on a public forum. And we are coming to the end of our time, but before we go, I feel like we've covered a good 101 for anyone watching, whether you're on YouTube or Facebook or here in Simpatico, of the kind of history and politics of the recent decades of where Australia's gone as far as energy and politics. And also you've covered some great examples of where Australia could go for better or for worse, depending on if we continue down this kind of gas route versus going where Oslo is obviously going. I just wanted to also just end with talking about the media. So obviously you've come into this space in the media because you saw that as a really important space to be in, given what you'd seen. What about the kind of relationship between politics, fossil fuels, and the media in Australia?
Yeah, this is a huge thing. And of course, Australia, again, is just like this incredible unique case study. And there's nowhere like it in the world because Australia has a particularly concentrated media environment. Obviously, News Corporation owns the majority of content in Australia, but also the competitors to News Corp, there's two or three. There's Fairfax/Nine and the Australian Broadcasting Corporation, which is the government broadcaster. Now, this creates this really unique situation where ideas tend to replicate very quickly, and there's not a lot of diversity of thought or ideas in the way that climate issues are covered. And that really manifests as a very serious problem sometimes. So to give you an example, again, for the previous federal election in May 2019, the opposition party, the centre-left party, the one that had its little run of, fantastic climate policy for 3 or 4 years, was again proposing a climate policy at this federal election. And the media narrative that emerged around that election was sort of haranguing that party for not having costed their policy, which is basically saying, how much will it cost to implement your policies? And of course, the really tricky part was that there was actually no easy way of determining the cost of this, because it actually wasn't like just taking a chunk of money from the budget and just pouring it onto a particular sector. It was actually a bunch of really sort of subtle policy mechanisms and levers that the variables for how much each would cost were just so wild that modeling it was almost a pointless exercise.
Wow. Yeah.
But the narrative was set, and it was basically, why are you hiding how much this particular climate policy costs? And on top of, so two major issues, of course, with that. The first being there was no conversation about the cost of inaction on climate change.
Yeah, which became apparent the next summer when it was what are now known as the Black Summer bushfires.
Of course, that was 3/4 of a year away from that election, and the question was answered very, very clearly. But then the second part of the problem there was also that climate action has immediate benefits as well, some really, really significant ones. Mm-hmm. And this is not entirely the fault of the media. People like myself, like, advocates, activists, and writers, we have not always done a particularly great job of talking about this as clearly as we ought to. So something like air pollution, changing a fleet of vehicles from combustion engines to electric vehicles, or combustion buses to electric buses, very significantly reduces air pollution in cities. And the number of us that are dying from indoor and outdoor air pollution is totally mind-boggling. And then of course the other thing I should mention as well, I've talked about electrons, I've talked about cars, but buildings is the other really big chunk as well. A lot of us power homes, using gas. I live in Norway, but a lot of people power homes using gas. A lot of people cook using gas, and fossil fuels really, homes, when it comes to homes, oil and gas tend to have a surprisingly large role to play in people's homes currently. And so one of the consequences of that is that if you burn a fossil fuel in your kitchen, then you breathe in a lot of stuff that you shouldn't.
Yeah.
And so there are major, major health benefits to switching over to electric options, but also it's expensive and it's hard and it's time consuming to switch over. So people need a lot of help. And so that is something that we're starting to see around the world. If you look at the US's climate, the Democrats in the US, if you look at their climate plan, they really talk about things in a very short-term sense. Of course, they talk about climate change and they talk about the reasons why they want to act on climate change, but they also talk about jobs that are created right now. Australia's Labor Party is starting to do this as well. They also talk about changes to economies that are very immediate. So, you can start exporting renewable power in the form of hydrogen pretty quickly. A lot of the technologies are already there. So all of that is starting to change, and it's a positive change. And I actually have a very strong feeling that the media is starting to get a lot better on a lot of this stuff in Australia. But I haven't quantified it. So who knows? But that's my vibe. That's the vibe I get.
Well, thank you so much for joining me for this interview. I am conscious that I've got another interview coming up. It's really exciting with Katarina Gator at the top of the hour to talk about having climate conversations. What we're going to do now is roll to some credits, but I know I've got some questions here from Mike. So if you have like even 5 minutes after that for some quick fire questions to stick around, that'd be awesome. But yeah, thank you so much. Thanks for the interview. And yeah, we'll be back after the credits.
Thank you.
So I'm going to just really quick fire Mike's question about journalism to you, because for context, here in Simpatico, Mike hosts a channel on impact media and climate change. So he asked, do you have any advice for journalists on how to cover climate issues, particularly those of us who are based in the US where climate change is so heavily politicized? Big question.
I feel almost like ashamed to think of myself as being able to give advice to someone working on this in the US, because I can't relate to how intense it must be. So obviously send all my support to anyone looking to do that. But one thing that I found works really well to counter polarization is to talk about things in a very literal sense. And so really often that means avoiding what politicians and political parties are saying about something until you first described it in its most direct way. So I'm not talking about being scientifically accurate in the way you describe something. I'm talking about describing a problem in a way that it normally might not be. So for instance, talk about climate change as a risk to human safety or as a threat to our health. That is something that we're actually sort of not used to hearing. We're used to hearing of climate change as a threat to the environment. And so what that does is that I find that it sort of resets where people are at thinking about a problem. And then you can talk about, this particular party has a policy or a lack of policy, and the consequences will be X, Y, and Z. And then you can close again with the same thing. Jay Rosen for NYU describes it as the truth sandwich. And I sort of take that as it's not necessarily a truth sandwich, like it's not debunking, but it's the same principle of having something that really resets the way people think about something. And you can apply it, not just to the general climate change problem, but also to a bunch of sub problems as well. Like if you're talking about agriculture, just describing a cow literally as what it is, which is, this organic, like methane generating, flesh ball that kind of we have created. It's a funny way of describing it, but it sort of it just brings people away from the jargon, and it brings people away from the full decade they've had of reading and hearing about it in one specific way. So being a little bit creative in that sense really diffuses the political sort of guards that people put up around themselves. I find that's a good thing to do. I hope that helps.
Well, Mike says, thank you. I really appreciate the support. I think that message came through, especially when you gave a call out to the US environmental journos who might be watching. And also the other question that I'm seeing is around what information there is out there about the environmental impacts of mining for precious metals in EVs. And I see this kind of thing coming out, people saying the same about, oh, well, solar panels have precious metals in them. What about the waste from solar panels? How are you seeing these sorts of issues represented in the media? We've only got a few minutes, but just so you know.
Yeah, I'll keep it brief, but it's something that I care about quite a lot, because the thing that I think about a lot is, I was saying to you before we started the call, it's report season. Everyone's forecasting the future, everyone's forecasting the next decade, and every single forecast has a line for renewables over the past decade that looks like this, and then to get to where we need to be, the line for renewables looks like this. And it's not just renewables, it's like EVs, it's heat pumps, it's just like, new transmission lines, new battery storage. Everything is going from this to this. And it's something that needs materials to build. You need to construct a machine out of something. And so when it comes to human rights issues and environmental issues around the procurement of those materials that you need to build climate action out of, there needs to be a lot more focus on it. Unfortunately, there's a bit of a dichotomy at the moment, because people will, in bad faith, take that issue and use it to argue against acting at all. So you could, it more simply described as concern trolling, which is basically pretending to be concerned about something, but you're not really concerned about it. You have ulterior motives. And so that's a real problem that comes up a lot. And then, of course, the other side is people do the same thing, but they sort of go the other direction. They're like, fossil fuels are worse, so why would we care about making renewables better? And of course, the answer is very simple, is that we actually want to build the best transition that we can to make it last a long time. We wanted to make it sustainable. If it stops halfway, that's really bad. And if there's a backlash against, the procurement of minerals for building these things, or alternatively, if we do it in the wrong way and we sort of run out of access to those materials, that's
we just
also a really
waste them.
serious problem.
Yeah.
Thank
you so much. Sorry.
No, that's okay. I'm done. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate having you on the show, because I've observed you on Twitter, and I know that in describing your book, you actually say it's a culmination of a decade of work and tweets is the other thing that you included in that. And for anyone who is watching, please do follow along, because you will learn so much. What's your handle again?
It's at Ketan, KETANJ 0.
0. That's a 0.
Someone
okay.
took the O.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Ketan. And anyone watching on YouTube, Facebook, follow along, because you're not only going to see stuff about Australia, but also Norway and Europe and the US. Really appreciate you coming on the show, and hopefully we can come have you back on sometime. And I'd really love that. But now
thanks for having me on.
Have some sleep.
It's been a good chat. Thank you. Yes, I'm going to go to sleep.
Thanks so much. Catch you later. Bye.
See ya. Bye.
Cool. So that was Ketan Joshi, and he is he's a clean tech and energy writer, communicator, and analyst, and he's been part of the media landscape here in Australia and Renew Economy. And recently he has taken his Australian-born expertise and perspectives to Norway, where he continues to be part of the Australian media landscape as far as these discussions on energy and politics. But also he is turning his attention to putting that all in context with Europe and with the US, because of course we're in this globally, and Australia is one of those international pain points, international pains, even on a when you go to places like COP. So definitely follow along his work. He's also got a website, and have a look. If you're in Simpatico, you'll be able to go to his profile and have a look at all of that. But for now, I am going to be switching on to a different stream because our next guest coming up is CEO and founder of Climate for Change, Katerina Gator. She has been on Climate Australia in other contexts already. Firstly, she was here as part of the panel discussion we had for National Science Week on climate action. And Simpatico also partnered with Climate for Change in producing their online fundraiser, which is still going now. And is kicking goals. So we're going to talk about that too. So I will be back with our next guest and then stick around after that because I've got Justine Dillon who's coming on the show. She's from Narangwal in the Gold Coast region, and she's going to talk about her role in Aboriginal land management and heritage and what that means in terms of sustainability too. So I'll be back. what are you up to as far as the donations at this stage?
I think 172,000 maybe.
Wow.
I don't know.
Wow.
Yeah, that's where we were this morning.
Epic.
Yeah, it's slowed right down though. Like this week's only been 12,000, whereas the previous weeks have been like 40, 30. So
yeah,
we have to build it back up. But yeah, you always have a quiet week. So
yeah, and I suppose
a long campaign.
It is. And do you have we can talk about this in the interview too, but I was wondering like how you're competing, like people's pages are going. Do you have someone who's donated, who's got lots of friends that have been putting their name on their donations?
Yeah, well, everyone has their own page. So all the fundraisers have their own page, and there's a leaderboard that shows how people are going. Yeah, so I mean, my son, I guess it's me who does the fundraising, but my son's always the face of my fundraising campaign. He's up top. You know, that's a bit easier for me. And then there's quite a few people who've like raised like $5,000 or something. So
wow.
Yeah,
that's amazing. And did someone get the coffee date with like the coffee catch up with all the celebs? Yeah,
so 5 different people got coffee catch ups with 5 different celebrities. So
and they already know who they are.
Yeah, we announced them on the Monday following. So yeah,
I think a few people were very keen from their comments to catch up with Simon.
Yeah. Although Judith smashed the donations.
I'm not surprised.
But I mean, I guess her page was the one that was highlighted the most as well, and so it was easiest to find.
Yeah, it was such a fun night. Yeah. I'm looking forward to hearing how some of those catch-ups go. I'm sure people have like, okay, I've got a list of questions to ask Big Boy.
Yeah, I find it a really bizarre thing. I just never do that myself. Like, find the point in having a coffee with someone I don't know if there's no...
Yeah, I suppose it does speak to what a good communicator you are, though, that you're like, look, this isn't my thing, but my audience would be really into this.
Yeah. I mean, it's the same with the challenges, right? Like, I was like, oh my God, they sound really bad. But then, it worked out really well. And
yeah, people have fun. And you obviously got, oh my gosh, Mike eating that onion at the end. When he said his goal, and it was that early in the night, I was like, oh, he's just signed up to eat an onion. He didn't even try to get it out of reach.
Yeah.
So good. But yes.
Yeah, it was fun. Yeah, and actually, like since then, it's funny having that water thrown in my head was actually really good.
You need that at the end of the night.
Like, it's amazing, like, when you get that water, like all this, your blood rushes through you. And I was so warm, like I felt, it was like having a big shot of whiskey or something.
Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Climate Australia. I'm your host, Lee Constable, and I'd like to start by acknowledging that I am broadcasting to you wherever you are from the land of the Turrbal people, here specifically on the land of the Ningi Ningi people. And I'd like to pay my respects to elders past and present, as well as acknowledge the ongoing relationship that Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people across the many First Nations of this country we now call Australia have with land, sea and sky, and acknowledge that you might be watching anywhere in the world on First Nations land as well. Today, I will be talking to CEO and host CEO and founder of Climate for Change, Katerina Gaita. So Katerina, welcome to the show. You've brought your background in everything from community engagement and behaviour science and comms all together into making an organisation. Could you just explain to everyone how that happened?
Oh gosh, I mean, it's always a long story, but I'll try and keep it short. I guess, so a key moment for me, I guess, was around 2008, I think it was, when I read a book called Climate Code Red. Some people might be familiar with that. I think it definitely had a huge impact here in Australia. And, you know, it hit me like a ton of bricks. I just knew that my life would never be the same again. For a long time, I really didn't know what to do. I was really hit by climate grief, despair. I'd find myself sort of walking down the street. I'd walk into the supermarket and find I had tears running down my face. I remember even waking up in the middle of the night one night and tears were running down my face because I'd been crying my sleep. And then, I think the first moment for me, and one that, you know, I often talk about, was when I asked myself, well, have I given up hope? Is everything completely hopeless? And when immediately I knew that I couldn't answer yes to that. And as soon as I realized that, then for me, I guess there were sort of two, well, I guess for me, I felt that the key thing was that if I knew the reality of climate change and I had hope that it could be fixed, then it was really upon me to do everything I could to realize that hope, that I couldn't stand by and just hope that someone else might, you know, that it might happen, that I had to be active in making that hope a reality. But then the big question for me was what can I possibly do? Because I'm not a politician. I'm not a climate scientist. I'm not an engineer. I'm not a billionaire. What could I possibly do that could have an impact? And I sort of interrogated, well, why do I have hope? And I realized that it was because, you know, we actually know what the problem is. We know what we have to do to fix it. We have solutions available. Really, the only thing missing is that social and political will to enact those solutions at the speed and the scale that we need them. And that's where I felt I could make a difference, that everybody can, I'd done enough work in behaviour change already to know that probably the thing that influences people's beliefs and actions and behaviours the most is their peers and what their peers think and believe and are doing. And so if all of us could influence, all of us who really care deeply and are committed to the action we need could influence, even in Australia, it's really just 2 or 3 people, then we'd have that social and political will that we need. So initially was like, all right, well, I'll look for an organisation that can help me do that work and have really effective conversations, because I knew that two-way dialogue was the way that most people sort of process information and form opinions and decide to act on things. But I quickly found there wasn't an organisation that could help me do that in my community and in Australia. And so I started it, really. I guess that's the short version. I probably quite naively, I had no idea really what it would take to start and build an organisation. But I think that's often a good thing.
Yeah, I was going to say, you don't want to know too much that prevents you from jumping in.
So I've learned a lot along the way.
Yeah, so now you've got, this thriving community. Climate for Change has just had what has been a yearly event, but this one online due to COVID, the virtual online fundraiser. So what does the organisation look like? What sort of things does that money go into to allow you to do for the next year?
Yeah, sure. So we have a few small projects that help people to have better conversations amongst their peers about climate change. But our core work, what we spent sort of 90%, I guess, of our energy and funding on, is our climate conversation program, which has it's quite literally stolen the Tupperware party approach. I guess it's public knowledge that my deep dark secret is that I once sold Tupperware for 6 months. It didn't last too long doing that, but I saw how powerful that model could be, and figured let's use it for purpose rather than for profit. So the way that works is that we train people who are passionate about climate action, committed to climate action. We train them to go out into people's homes and facilitate it's sort of half presentation, half conversation. So we start with a video that sort of makes sure everyone understands the climate science and the solutions that we need, and is on the same page. And then we facilitate a conversation around, well, what does that mean for you personally? And what can we do that's most effective? And really, I guess, trying to help people realize that if we're going to have these changes at the speed and scale we need them, then we really need systemic change, and we need people with power to deliver those massive changes to be acting. And so whilst it's really important for us in our own individual lives to be doing what we can on an individual and consumer level, we really need to be active as citizens in our democracy, people in our communities, creating that social and political change that we need to have those big society-wide changes. And those facilitators, they usually start with people in their own networks. They ask them to host a conversation. They go along to that person's house. That person invites 10 or so friends to their home. Our facilitator facilitates this conversation, gets people to that point, and then we ask them to sign up to take action with us. Mm-hmm. But we also ask everybody in the room to host the next conversation. So that's that Tupperware approach, where at each conversation you're aiming to get 2 more hosts. I guess,
that's great.
Just like coronavirus.
You can spread things for good.
So, but yeah, I guess we've seen how quickly that can take off if each time you get 2 more hosts and they facilitate the conversation in their room and living room, and then you have 2 more, then I guess, we can have communication at the depth you really need for that individual change that we need, but at the scale that we could have actually society-wide change that would make a difference. So that's how we work, and all our funding goes, really to run that program. I think if you're a lay person, it probably feels like a lot of money to reach people, because face-to-face engagement is it's human resource intensive, and it does cost money. But our model is far more efficient than any other model that I'm aware of in terms of engaging people face-to-face. So,
and how many facilitators do you have at the moment?
That's a really good question. You should have told me you were asking.
Sorry. I just became curious during this discussion.
I haven't checked in at the moment as to who we have. I know we've just been doing a fair bit of recruitment and training, so my numbers would be out of date. But normally, I guess, if I'm going back to this year, we had a bit of a lull. We decided, actually, even before COVID hit, that we would pull back from doing our conversations for a little while to review our impact and do a bit of strategic thinking. And we've just been trying to start that back up again. But when we were sort of, before we went into that lull and we were really active, then we would have around, I think it was about 70 to 80 people who are sort of on the books at any one time. And they'd sort of, I guess the way that it works, some people are really active for a while and then they slow down and then they come back. I mean, they're all volunteers. So
it can work in with whatever their lives are like. Yeah.
So at any one time, I'd say each month we'd probably have 25 to 30 who are active in each month.
Wow. And at the moment, obviously there's always going to be discussions about, oh no, it's not about the individuals, it's about the government, but actually individuals can have system change. So do you find that sometimes people go into these discussions thinking they're going to be told how to have shorter showers and recycle, but they come out surprised by what they actually learnt?
Yeah, I think that's probably the biggest thing for me has been, I guess I went in there thinking I would be really trying to convert people on climate change, but actually most people do understand that this is a serious problem. They know that we need to be doing more. They probably don't understand the detail of, 1.5, 2 degrees and why we need to stay below those temperatures and what that would take. But, they generally are on board with the fact that this is a serious and urgent problem and we need to be doing a whole lot more.
Yeah.
I think I think our whole society, our media, our, neoliberal sort of framework is very much about the individual and the consumer. And, that's how we identify as people these days. I saw a study recently that looked at the use of the word consumer, client, citizen, in our media, and citizen used to be way up there, and now no one uses that language anymore. So I think for people it's quite that is the biggest takeaway for them in these conversations, that actually we are citizens in a democracy and we do have power as citizens if we choose to use that power. And for some people that's really mind-blowing and empowering, and all of a sudden they can see, how, rather than spending every moment trying to work out, should I be buying I guess my dilemma was, should I buy the organic tinned tomatoes from Italy or the local ones that are not, although trying to make all those minute decisions in your everyday life that actually you can be writing letters, joining boycotts, investing, divesting, really trying to shift the powers that be. And that's actually a lot less effort and more fun and more powerful.
It's interesting. You're like, wait, I just get to maybe put my money in a different bank or a different superannuation fund, and then I make a huge difference and feel really good about it. But like, I didn't move from the couch, and that's kind of like, oh, cool. Like, man.
Yeah, I mean, obviously we have to do more than that. And I think really the important thing about climate action is to think of it. I think early on people used to ask me, oh, can I just have a list of the top 5 things I can do? And that really frustrated me, because I think we've got to think of climate action not as a list of things, but as a practice in our everyday lives. Just as, you might practice yoga and you do it a few times a week. Or, some people practice, have a religious practice or a spiritual practice that they do on a regular basis. And I think, and they make time for that in their lives. They put aside time. They repeat it on an ongoing basis. I think
and
that's
also
how
it's part of their ethos, even if they're not, doing something that might look like an act. Like, I don't take off my climate action hat. It's just on all the time. It's just part of me.
Yeah, so I think that's how we need to start thinking about it and helping people to bring it into their lives rather than a list of things to do. So I think that's one of the things we're trying to work on. How do we frame that for people, and how do we support people to do that bit by bit and make it a habit rather than the things? But I think generally if you start to think strategically about, what's your bang for buck when you're taking action, then I think it can actually be really empowering and freeing to realize that, you can do some really powerful things rather than getting caught up in the minutiae of everyday life. But for other people, it's quite confronting. People do have a lot of people have an aversion to politics, and I think there's a difference between democracy and politics. But I think that's a big barrier for a lot of people, and sometimes our message can be confronting for people as well.
Yeah, and I wanted to turn the discussion to democracy and politics, because the other thing you do is around letter writing. Could you explain what that looks like and why that makes such a big impact?
Yeah, so it's not just, so what it's interesting. So we have these conversations. In those conversations, we really, I guess, ask people probing questions to get them to reflect upon what is most impactful and how we make the big changes. And, once you start to think about that, it does become pretty obvious that we have to shift the politics and, and in the money and all of the sort of the big things that influence our systems. And we talk about how, how do we shift the politics? How do you have an influence? And we talk about the fact that in Australia, we and obviously this is different for viewers in different countries, but in Australia we have representative democracy. We have electorates, and within your electorate you have a representative whose job it is to listen to you and represent you. And we can actually engage with those MPs. We can write to them, we can call them, we can visit them, we can hold protests outside their office. We can do all sorts of things to get their attention and get them to take notice. And it is their job to do that. And if they don't do that, we have a choice to put someone else in their place. And if enough people feel strongly about that, then that is the trump card in our democracy. It doesn't matter how much money a party might have or a candidate might have. It doesn't matter what lobby groups there are or what the media is saying. Like if we as a community can get together and organize ourselves and voice our concerns to our representative, then we might be able to change them. And if we can't change them, then we can organize and get rid of them, and get someone else in their place who will listen to us. And that's a hard thing to do. But, I think what's really interesting in Australia right now is, that in the last few elections, there have been 2 instances where communities have actually done that in seats that were really safe, where those communities tried to voice what they wanted from their elected representative, and their elected representative didn't listen to them and clearly went against what they believed in, and they organised themselves and got an independent candidate to stand and got them elected. So, that's not necessarily what we're doing, but we are at least encouraging people to have that voice, through writing letters, through making phone calls, visiting, joining local community groups that are trying to represent the community on key issues. Obviously, climate's our main one. So that's always been the conversation in our conversations. And then one of our volunteers, Sue Dwyer, she'd been facilitating these conversations for a while, and then she realised that she was talking to people and encouraging them to talk to their MPs, but she had never spoken to her own. So she went along to her own. So she made a visit to her own MP, and it's a long story, but in the end, like, she actually got to a point where a new person was her MP. He had to step down because he had dual citizenship, and so a new MP was elected, and so she went to visit that new MP, and she really built up such a relationship with that MP that MP actually asked her for advice on her maiden speech. She has actually influenced, potentially, like that MP started lobbying within the Labor Party to get climate emergency recognised. It wasn't just Sue. There's lots of people around the country, but she had a huge influence on her MP. And from that, she felt so empowered about that she wanted to help others be able to engage with their MPs too. So she started what she calls MP engagement groups. And really, I don't think Climate for Change can take credit for that. It really is Sue and other volunteers who've got on board with that, but we do support that. So at our conversations, we encourage people to go to these MP engagement groups, to join them. They get together once a month, they write letters, they think about how they can engage their MPs and get responses from them. And so it's a peer-to-peer support network, I guess, for people who want to engage with their MPs. And yeah, I think I was just saying to you before, I was looking for some advice on, we just had our local council elections. I was trying to decide who to vote for, and I went on this local Facebook group where people are talking about that, and someone was referring to some work that the local MP engagement group had been doing to collect candidates' positions on climate change, and referring everyone to that work. And I went and used that work to help me decide my vote, and it was just nice to see that full circle where a group started in my area from Sue's work, which had come out of Climate for Change's work.
And also another example of climate change conversations, maybe between one person and MP, can be fed into conversations within a Facebook group that can actually, influence someone's decision by helping them be more informed, which is really cool.
Yeah. So it's real citizens' democracy, and it's what democracy should be. Like, we are it's meant to be a system where, we can't all make every decision on every, we can't all be politicians making decisions, but we can elect people who will represent us, and we can hold them to account. And that's what our system's meant to do. It's just, I think, being hijacked by vested interests a lot of the time, but we can take that back by getting together as citizens and supporting each other to engage with our elected representatives and hold them to account and choose who we want to vote for.
Yeah, and I think I've had this discussion recently where with a few different people in different contexts about climate action and activism, and how the words action and activism, they can look really different for different people. Do you find that sometimes people are worried because they're not the person who's the loud one or the protester or whatever, that they're worried that there won't be a way for them to engage in that, and that's not for them?
I think people feel, because through our conversations it's a dialogue, and it goes over about 2 hours. So people go through a thought process where they really decide that they want to make a difference, and that the best way they can make a difference is to really try and shift the system, and then they start to think about things they can do. And I think they sort of arrive at these actions that they can do and feel excited about them without even sort of thinking of them as activism. Yeah. Then when you say to someone, well, this is activism, they're like, oh, wow. I don't think
they were like, but I don't have a placard.
Yeah. So, the word activism often has bad connotation, or, negative connotations for a lot of people, a lot of stereotypes, but really it is just being active in having a voice for the things that we care about and trying to get those who represent us to act on those things.
And that could be a phone call, or it could be a petition, or it could be a letter or a Facebook group. Yeah. Awesome.
Yeah.
Well, I can see on the live chat a question from Mike that I'd love to ask you. What we're going to do right now is just roll some credits, and then we'll come back. Is it okay if I ask you a couple of questions after credits?
Yeah, absolutely.
Awesome. All right. Well, we'll be right back. Okay, here we are, post credits. So thanks so much for giving us a really good overview of Climate for Change. I know it's many things and you can only ever scratch the surface. Mike's asking a question. He's actually one of the Simpatico hosts who has a channel as well, and his channel is on Impact Media. So he's really interested in a lot of climate communication and media. He says, Katerina, sometimes people here in the US sort of struggle to find the silver lining or the shred of hope to cling on to, but there's a lot of exciting positive things happening in places all over the world, like Australia. What would you say to someone looking for the light at the end of the tunnel? Is there something that gives you hope on a daily basis that you encourage others to look forward to?
Yeah, there are lots of different things. And I think there's this concept of active hope, that hope is not a passive emotion. It's something you actually work at. You work to maintain it and you work to realize it. And I would say that on a daily basis, I do that. It's very easy for all those negative things to creep into your mind, but what's the point in focusing on those? And so I sort of have things that I remind myself of to give me hope, and they vary depending on the things that I guess I'm most concerned about. I definitely find looking for stories of solutions to climate change are really helpful, and some of my go-to resources for that are the Drawdown Project, and you can just search that on the internet, Drawdown, and that website has lots of really fantastic solutions and really inspiring solutions. The film 2040, which is an Australian film, but I believe it's come out in the US recently, is really inspiring. And then, their website has other solutions as well. And then there's an online newsletter here in Australia, but I guess you could subscribe to it from anywhere in the world because it's online, called Renew Economy, which we were talking about before. And that sends you every day, mainly renewables news, but some climate news. And there's definitely some depressing stuff in there as well, but there's often really exciting, inspiring stories about projects around the world, and obviously with an Australian focus that when I'm feeling down, I jump into that and look for some positive stories. But then, there are also stories of community action that really inspire me as well. I mean, obviously, Greta has been hugely inspirational, and the school strikers. Here in Australia, those stories I talked about the communities that actually got independence elected. I know in the States, I guess I'm really grateful that our democracy, or our democratic system is a bit more robust, I think, at the moment. Unfortunately, in the US, it's a lot tougher, but there are really inspiring stories there. I really on Netflix there was that film called Knock Down the House, I think it is.
Oh, is that the one where AOC? Yeah, and I found that really, and it follows 3 other candidates who didn't, but even their stories are really inspiring, and they were working together as a collective as well.
Yeah. So those stories of community action, and yes, there are a lot of losses, but there are a lot of wins. And even when there are losses, I think you've got to realize that you're still making gains. And I think the other thing that gives me hope is, when I'm in the climate movement, I just meet so many incredible people who are intelligent, capable, committed, inspiring. And I just think we've got to win sometimes.
Yeah.
And there's also that podcast, Figueres, Optimism and Outreach.
Okay, Optimism and Outreach. Yeah, awesome.
Outrage. Optimism and Outreach. Okay. Then I think that imposes a moral responsibility on all of us to work towards making that hope bigger and making it a reality. And it's not good enough to give up, really.
Yeah, and I mean, I've thought about this myself as well, because I'm sure like anyone, regardless of whether you're someone like us who makes our whole work about climate change, or whether it's just something you work in a different sector that is impacted by climate change, but you still think about it all the time, it can get exhausting. You can feel alone. But I've noticed recently that some of the times I'm like, oh, maybe actually what I need is just to talk to other people who, like me, work in climate communications. And actually I've found recently, just this last week, I've had some great vent sessions. Do you find that sometimes, like, while that can't be the only thing we do you find that sometimes, the climate change community, or whoever it is, different Facebook groups, like, serve people in that way when it comes to looking after their mental health?
Yeah, definitely. I think there's a fair bit of work now on climate grief and climate anxiety, and the things that help the most are A, taking action, and B, finding people, a network of people that get it and that you can talk to about it. And sometimes those conversations are hopeful, and sometimes they are just, you can't be, you can't
like caught in it.
Yeah, maintaining hope is important, and you have to work on it. But it's also human to have moments where you're just it's overwhelming and you're getting down, and then when you have a community to share that with, like we find we have a Facebook group for all our facilitators, and there are times where someone will just say to the group, "I'm really not coping at the moment. I'm really down about this. I'm struggling," and others are able to lift them up or meet them for a coffee and talk to them. And you really do find that as a group, we're able to maintain that energy and that hope, even though individuals in the group are having a bad time. And it's really beautiful to watch.
And I think that might be it as well, because sometimes I know now that I'm a freelancer, or a sole trader, like I used to be in an office surrounded by people, and I have the Simpatico team that I'm talking to every day, and I have all these different groups of people. But I think it's nice if you're having a kind of bad day to know there are other people who are carrying the torch while you kind of recuperate and collect your thoughts before you're ready to get up and have another go.
Absolutely. Yeah, we definitely need to be. We're only going to win this if we can work together and support one another.
And And maintaining your own mental health and energy allows you to do that for others. But if you don't do it for yourself, you're going to burn out, aren't you?
Exactly. Yeah. And we, as part of our facilitators have monthly trainings that they can attend to sort of just keep up different skills. And we try and make sure that, at least 2 of those trainings each year are some climate grief, self-care trainings. Really, acknowledge that anyone working in this space is going to be feeling that. And there are things we can do and practices we can partake in that will help. So,
yeah, great. Well, that's definitely good to know, because that's something that I personally have been thinking about finding as a resource for myself and, to keep my own energy up and people that I care about in the climate space. Before we go, I just wanted to ask you if you'd like to give a plug if anyone's watching and wants to donate, because I know you've got your current fundraiser.
I'd love that. Thank you. I should actually, I don't know, can I type or can I'll
yeah,
tell
I
you.
can post in the Simpatico TV.
Yeah, great. So as an organisation, the vast majority of our funding, which goes directly towards supporting those conversations we talked about, it come from an annual crowdfunder that we do each year. Our current goal is $350,000. We're about halfway through the campaign and we're sitting at 172. So we're on track, but we definitely need all the support we can get. And I guess what I love about crowdfunding is it is that people power in action. Literally $5 here, $50 there. Occasionally people give 500 or even 1,000, but I think the average donation is about 60 Australian dollars, and it all adds up to be able to for us to do that work, and that money goes towards paying our core team of staff who support the volunteers to do all that engagement work. And this year, our new strategy work has been that our goal is to get our conversations across the whole of Australia, engage over 40,000 people in the next 3 years, but also identify 2 really strategic communities in the next year that we could really target and build up a presence in, that if we could shift the social climate in those communities, that would have an impact on the way that the rest of Australia responds. So we're pretty excited at the potential for impact if we can raise that money to jump in January, which is our goal.
Well, I applaud you, and not just thinking about climate change as an individual thing or even as a system thing, but as a thing that we can have collective social impact on, and thinking really strategically about that. It's not easy, but it's so important, and it's so great to see organisations like Climate for Change doing that. Thank you so much for everything you do for Climate for Change, and for all the ripples that have rippled out from you and your facilitators and everyone you meet. Yeah, it's really awesome. Thank you so much for all your work.
Thank you so much for having me, and for your work as well. It's been really a pleasure to get to know you over the last, I don't know how long it's been now.
It feels like forever and no time at all, because so much has happened this year.
Yeah. So, thank you. And I do hope that we can come back and have more chats as well.
Well, we're not going anywhere. If you are watching on Facebook and YouTube and feeling a little left out, you can go to simpatico.tv. You'll be able to see a link to sign up. It's free to sign up. You can be in the live audience. You can see these conversations with people like Katerina and hear about their work. You can ask live questions. You can watch not just all the past episodes of my channel, but all the other climate change related topics and more. It's a really exciting place to be. Thank you so much, Katerina, and we'll let you get about your day because I know you're so busy. Thank you so much for finding the time for us. Really appreciate it.
Take care. Bye.
Awesome. That was Katerina Gator. And my next guest will be on in about 20 minutes time, although we will be streaming not long our pre-stream discussions. So stick around. I will be changing streams soon to talk to Justine Dillon. She is joining us from the Narangwal Gold Coast Aboriginal Association Incorporated, and she works in Indigenous land management and protection. She works across that space of cultural heritage and land rights and land management, and all those things go together, of course. So she's an awesome guest that we're excited to have here. But for now, I'll sign off this stream and I'll see you back, hopefully on Simpatico TV, but if not, on Facebook and YouTube. And I'll see you back soon, okay?